Carried. Thank you to the residents who came. Thank you to the staff who worked so hard to put up the notice of motion and who sat here. Thank you. Tricky, complex issue. We are now going to move on to the next item on the agenda. So the next item is the annual reporting on asset management maturity and policy implementation update. So Ross and Greer, welcome.
Tēnā tātou katoa, tēnā koe chair, tēnā koe mayor. We are bringing this item to the Transport Resilient Infrastructure Committee. The motion is to endorse this nature of reporting, and the reporting is around annual asset management maturity and reporting on the asset management policy implementation. So my name's Greer and I'm in the infrastructure strategy team. That's in Megan Tyler's directorate, and with me is Ross Roberts, who is in Barry's directorate. So it shows, I think we're bringing this item together because that really spans asset management, and the importance of it spans across a lot of the council group. This one. So I'm just going to talk briefly to the first part of it, and Ross will take the second part of it. So the first part is around annual asset management maturity. There's a bit in here about how important that is to Auckland Council Group. That won't be a surprise, particularly after this morning's discussion. A little bit about what asset management maturity is, why we do this kind of reporting, why would we do it each year, and ideally bring it to this committee. Some findings that we've had through the review on asset management maturity through the LTP, and then a little bit of additional data that might be interesting, high-level data that might be interesting. There's a lot to this, and so we definitely encourage you to ask questions, but there is so much behind this that it probably could warrant follow-up questions and discussions. So we'll keep that in mind as we go along. So the scale and role of Auckland Council's infrastructure is huge. Our asset value is around 69 billion. That's of course changing all the time. Our projected infrastructure spend over 30 years is currently projected to be 295 billion. Our 10-year capex alone is just under 38 billion, and over the next 10 years, 96% of our capex spend is in infrastructure, 77% of our total spend is in infrastructure. A bit of a graphic on the right there to give you a sense of scale of our investment against some other infrastructure owners. Council there, our 22-23 year, the total OPEX and CAPEX investment, and then Waka Kotahi in the same year, Defence, Transpower, and then the sum of the next 5 largest district councils. So what is asset management maturity? It's really just a way of talking about assessing and benchmarking asset management systems and performance against best practice. So there are all kinds of ways of assessing maturity. There are industry-specific ones. There's a lot of specific things that transport need to do to assess asset management maturity. Generally, they're similar. Those frameworks, they summarise a bunch of components into a maturity level, something similar to the one across the bottom of the screen, from aware to advanced. And what we did was use the New Zealand Treasury Asset Management Maturity Framework to look across the group so that we could sort of assess apples with apples and asset management maturity relative to each other. So when I say maturity, that's around performance and good practice. We've also committed, as a council group, we've committed to measuring and talking about our performance in asset management through the development of the 2021 infrastructure strategy, which is part of the LTP, through this most recent round of infrastructure strategy and LTP, And there's also the council group asset management policy, which Ross is going to provide an update on. All of those things speak to talking about our performance in asset management in a systematic way. Why would we want to do this annually? This largely came from feedback in the development of the 2021 long-term plan from the Auditor General, that if we can talk about this every year, we get into the discipline of always thinking about how we're doing across our asset management, rather than every 3 years getting to the LTP and needing to quickly highlight issues and data and bring all of that together. It also supports everybody's understanding of what data is driving our investment decisions when we get to budget making, and just highlights issues early rather than, again, having those come up every 3 years. So this is sort of the findings of the asset management maturity assessment down the bottom. So we assessed everybody on the same framework, the Treasury framework, so that we could get more of an apples with apples comparison. This is also relative maturity to the other portfolios within Auckland Council Group. And you can see there's a real range. Just an important note that it's not essential for all the asset portfolios to be at an advanced level. There is an appropriate level, and this is their current performance. So not all of the different parts of the group have set and established their appropriate level of performance, but in the appendix to this report, you'll see there's a slide on each different part of the asset system, each of the different asset owners, and if they have set a target, it's in there. It also includes their focus areas for the coming financial year, so you can see where probably their high priority issues are and what they're going to work on for the coming financial year. We will ideally come back in a year and update on progress on those focus areas and update with any other relevant information. So there's a couple of key data sets that can be surfaced, I guess, through this kind of process. One is particularly important and required by the Local Government Act in development of the legislation, in development of the infrastructure strategy, is asset condition, and being transparent and sharing where our assets are at in terms of condition. There's always nuances to this stuff, and one of those is that depending on how mature and what practice the different parts of the asset group are using, the asset data might be coming through in a slightly different way. So transport and Three Waters, you can see on the slide, they are also at the higher end of maturity, and they report their asset condition based around strategic network assets, so a location and maybe a particular building, and also at component level. So the asset owners below that only reporting at component level. So an example of that is, if you can see under Tātaki, we've got the stadiums there as the second line item down. That's reporting components of the stadium, not that there are, 80%, 4 out of 5 are in excellent condition. It's that all of the components that make up all of the stadiums, there are some that are in poor condition. So, toilets and car parks and that kind of level. So we want to ideally bring this data all together, but in bringing it together, there's some nuances between how it's reported, where it's a work on. The other thing that we want to get better at demonstrating, and we've been working on this annually, is around what are our investment drivers and how well is our investment aligned to our strategies. So this is just CapEx. That's where we've got some better quality data. We want to get to have an overview of the total investment. But this can give a view of what are the key drivers of our investment and where there's alignment in our strategies. So the blue chart shows quite a proportion of our CapEx is driven by levels of service, critical renewals, and also cost management, so spending to reduce future foreseen costs. At the bottom there, you can see, I guess I'll pick out on the right-hand side is our growth. It's around our 10 years worth of CapEx and how well that is aligned with our future development strategy. Future development strategy says focus growth within our existing urban areas, and you can see that actually our 10-year CapEx is well aligned to that. So there's all kinds of insights that we can bring out of that. And just finally, the other thing that could be of interest and is something we're working on to communicate well is our 7 investment areas that you'll be familiar with, and how the asset owners and the asset management plans often straddle more than one of the investment areas. So, you know, they'll be grappling with how they need to inform these different investment areas, as we all are. But just an interesting point that, for example, our coastal assets, they're under natural environment and community. Transport, of course, you know, could potentially be under all, but they're here as transport and built environment. So this data and this information can help to inform into that investment area decision making when we come to use it. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Ross now, and he's going to talk about the council group asset management policy.
Kia ora. Thank you, Greer. Kia ora koutou. Kia ora Saho. I'm Chief Engineer here at Auckland Council, and I'm going to talk you through very briefly the implementation of our group asset management policy, which is about as dry a title as you can get. But underlying that, this is all about giving you the information you need to make the right decisions at the right time in a really well-informed way. We have a journey to undertake to improve our asset management in Auckland Council and across the group. And it's a continuing journey. No one ever gets to a perfect place. But we know that we can do better, and we have a plan in place to do better. The key to good asset management is understanding the services that get delivered. And this was really brought home in the conversations you've been having earlier this morning. What services do we deliver? What funds do we have available to pay for those services? And how much risk are we prepared to take? Because those three things coexist in a space, and we've got to decide a point within that space where we sit. How much money, how much risk, what levels of service? And that's a decision that gets made around here in this table. And you need good quality advice in order to make those decisions wisely. One of the key things that needs to be done is to have consistent advice across the group. And we recognised that several years ago, and that's why back in December 2021, we started this process of developing an asset management policy. And that policy, with its core intent, is to drive consistency and best practice across the group, to make sure that the advice that we give you is based on quality information, is consistent, is clear, and is coherent, so that it can be useful for you. You can see the timeline here, and you can see that we've started to accelerate progress on this, and most recently, through the Tier 2-3 refresh in Auckland Council, we have set up an Asset Management Centre of Excellence. And the purpose of that small team, which has been developed, is to bring together practice across the group, to make sure that we understand within Auckland Council how asset management can be done well and to drive that best practice. Related to this is the Asset Management Plan audit, which went to the Audit and Risk Committee, and that highlighted several areas for improvement, and our first task is to ensure that those areas for improvement are acted upon and are delivered over the coming year. The LTP audit came up with very similar conclusions, and so those two can be read together, and they give us a really good framework to build the programme on, so that we understand what work needs doing. So this is our current status. We have, down the bottom, the Asset Management Committee, and the key there is that it is driving consistent decision-making at an officer level across the organisation. We're getting everyone together from Eke Panuku, Auckland Transport, Watercare, all the CCOs, and the parent entity to make sure that we're driving the right direction. We're all trying to achieve the same aims and giving advice in the same way. And then within the Centre of Excellence, we are pulling together a team, and you can see that we're interviewing at the moment for those roles, bringing on board the right expertise so that we can deliver that really consistent approach and bring best practice into council. We don't want to be in a situation where you get advice in one form from one part of council and a different form from another, so that you're not able to compare spending and investment in one area with another. Otherwise, you don't have the information you need to make the right trade-offs and the right decisions for the benefit of our ratepayers. So that's what this is all about. There's a big programme of work ahead of us, and it's going to be a small team, but I think it has the opportunity to drive real change. And we're keen to come back to you and report progress every year so that you can see the improvements and see how the advice that you're getting is becoming more robust over time.
Great, thanks, Ross. And the next steps we've got up here are just looking to provide an annual update along the lines of what we've done today. And as Ross said, demonstrate that continuous improvement that happens through the system improvements that are in place now. Yeah, and also, as I said earlier, just to offer any other discussions on any detail. So I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Greer. Right here, questions. Angela?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Greer and Ross. I just had a question on the bar graph of the summary of all of the assets, and you've got a subsequent slide on it on the community portfolio. Just a question around the unknown part and what that means.
Yeah, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's where we don't know the condition of those assets. So we know they exist, we know that we own them, but we haven't done an investigation on the condition. As I mentioned earlier, community are one of the portfolios that report at a component level. So these will be, toilet door type level component information, and the condition of those are not known, as in they haven't been reported and included in their data set. Yeah, so you'll be aware there's a huge number of those assets. They might choose to not necessarily report the condition of each of those, but they do have, over time, they've got a process in place to reduce the number of unknowns that they've got.
And who are they?
Sorry, community portfolio.
I was just trying to get the fit with the local board who have that decision making. Do they get oversight to say, actually, we want to know the condition of our assets so we know what to invest in? So is there a linkage there, because the funding decision making will be coming from them in terms of local community assets?
I know we've had this discussion before. Other times we've talked about asset condition, that sharing of the asset data that community portfolio holds with the local boards, and I understand there is work underway, and it will be probably something that the asset management Centre of Excellence will work on further. Yeah. But we could get you a more detailed response.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I think we might even bring it to the community committee just to get some oversight over it. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
Great.
Thank you. Desley?
Yeah, I had the same thing. First of all, thank you for the report, really good. But I had the same question around local boards. What is the state of their assets? How do they look to use their funding and improve upon it and whatever at that lower level as well. But look, my bigger question is, as we get more mature in understanding the condition, how does your paper then feed into LTP discussions and your plan discussions? Because, all power to you, I don't think we've done a very good job necessarily to this point. And it's my desire to do much better. We've seen what happens when we don't maintain our assets, and we've seen the issues that causes. So how do you take the information and here we are, this is what needs to happen? How do we get rid of all the bad bits on the graph and prioritise them up as part of budgetary decision making?
Kia ora. Thank you for the question. I think Ross will have an answer as well, and I'll have a go to start with. I think one of the keys to that is this kind of data. So this is all of our planned investment and how well it's delivering on the things that we want it to deliver on. So that, I think, directly informs trade-off discussions. So where there are things that are in the orange here or in the grey here that are not necessarily delivering for health and safety and not, or legal and critical renewals, and are not necessarily delivering on anything else important, we have to get to the point where those are the things that are considered for trade-offs. It's a process that we've been working on since the 2021 LTP and through the annual budgets. It's always an uncomfortable decision because everything that council does has value. But I think using a process like this where we're assessing each of the value of the different investments is really important. And the better that is informed by asset management data, and the higher quality that asset management data is, we're better informed, you are all better informed about the risks that you're taking by investing or not investing. And so, yeah, that's how I see it building into the LTP. I know that's going to be a strong part of the LTP process as we look to the next LTP. All of this is continuous improvement though, getting all the data standardised, people understanding the value of the data, and then getting it to a level where the people around this table can also understand the value of the data so that it's presented in a way you can make those very difficult trade-offs. Did you want to add something?
Thank you, Greg. Yes, Kira, good question, thank you. And in terms of how the Asset Management Centre of Excellence will be involved, some of our key activities relate to driving better integration between our financial processes and our asset management processes, because there is always a challenge where they are running in parallel but not seamlessly linked together. And that seamless linkage is one of our key drivers to make the LTP process slicker, more efficient, more effective, and to make sure that the decisions that need to be made can be made at the right time and with the right information up front, rather than at the back end of the process when it's too late to make real change.
So supplementary if I may, Chair. So that was kind of my next question, and the Chief Executive's not here, but I just kind of want you to present your paper to the finance team, so that we're aligned, because what I don't want to see happen is all your work to this point just sitting there as a report. There has to be a what happens next. There has to be, right, now we know where we are, so what are the next steps under all these headings? And that's what I want to see happen. So it's no good presenting respectfully, and as I said, you've done a great job, no good reporting back respectively to this committee on the state of the nation. It is, what are we doing about it? All right, because I know, for example, just because it's a figure that's in my head, that when we did the LTP last term, we were $2 billion worse off because the first 6 years of councils hadn't done depreciation and been planned for those renewals. So, I don't want to be in that situation again. So you have to talk to finance and you have to make sure that as part of your reporting, it is what should happen next. And then it's us whether we do it or not, but actually that's what has to happen, Andy. You can't just have a report and just park it on the shelf. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks. Yeah, my question's around that community bit as well. Can I just clarify what I think I heard, which is that some of this is actually about the way that we're looking at the components. So, for example, we might have a condition survey on a block of toilets, but some of the recording is about the door of each stall, and we don't have that, but we might have the condition survey for the whole block. Is that a fair example?
Yeah, for community, it's the other way around.
Okay.
We've got the condition of the components, but not necessarily for the block as a whole.
Right. Because local boards have been making decisions about renewal, but they look at usually a block as a whole in that scenario. So that's kind of weird. Okay. And I guess so what's the intention in terms of, as that information is put together, including local boards in the assessment process? Because often they have a high level of local knowledge. And in previous terms, I remember the first term and probably the second term as well, when I was on a local board, we used to get, so say for example, we get a list of all the park benches, and it said, these ones are condition 5, so they need replacement. These ones are condition 4, we'd like to replace those as well. But we only have money for 20 benches, and there's 15 that need replacing, so you've got room for 5 more. Pick your top 5 from those condition 4s. And I think that's, while that's a level of operational detail, it's not ideal. It is good that local boards do get oversight of those kinds of things. So it sounds like we might have gone backwards on having some of that data and information, which is disappointing. Could you comment on that? Maybe not.
I don't think I can comment on what it might have previously been like, and I'm sure there are a lot of those processes happening, and as you say, the local board are going to make decisions on a physical place, probably more than the components. So I think what this just represents is I don't think that the data that we have that's collated is informing those decisions as well as it could be.
Okay.
We could get a more detailed response back from the community directorate.
Yeah, I mean,
Like to
I
know
think
more.
Councillor Dawson's idea of bringing this to the community committee is a good one. I guess also just mindful, my local board experience was the smallest metro board. And we might have been in a position to determine what the top 5 condition 4 benches were that needed replacing, but some of our colleagues with larger boards and more facilities, and more individual components, that may be more of a challenge, thinking of Howick in particular. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Richard?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you both for your knowledge of our assets and all the work you do on this. There are just a few quick questions. The one, does this factor in, we've had to have $1 billion of unscheduled spend this year on our assets that got blown away by climate change related event. Are you factoring in climate change into these figures, if we continue to have extreme weather events at that rate?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. In the infrastructure strategy, we identify climate change, emissions mitigation and adaptation in there as huge issues, the 7 big issues for infrastructure for the next 30 years. We also talk about how well the organisation is doing in terms of incorporating that information into our financial planning and what we actually spend money on. We're doing much better in emissions, where we can count things and invest in things that reduce emissions. We're not doing quite as well in the resilience space yet. And when I say not quite as well, it's because, often that's because we are responding to a lot of the issues as we go, and it's hard for us to get ahead of the wave and plan for the future. There's obviously some significant investments across the group that are directly related to resilience. So an imperfect answer is that to some extent we're embedding the requirements for resilience and climate change into our investment, but not fully. And we sort of lay that in quite a lot of detail in the infrastructure strategy.
Okay, and I see we score very poorly in the GHG emissions focus one. Is that mainly what we're building, or is that what the asset will cause in emissions long term? Does this help influence what we could be building to get the same outcome, just better emissions? Does it do that?
That criteria assesses whether the things that we're building and what impact they'll have on emissions. So to score very well, you need to be mitigating your emissions fully. So there are some things that are, the red is where we're not really delivering on our climate targets. Those things will be represented in many of the other places on those charts as high value somewhere else. So it's saying that if your sole priority was emissions, there's some proportion, just under 20% of our CapEx, that we shouldn't be spending on those things, but you would be then taking away the value that they deliver in the other areas.
Okay, that's quite good. And last question, we get constantly elected members, but also media, others, focus on the extreme cost of new or repairing assets. Is there anything you can do with this body of work to help influence, A, where we could find cheaper options, but also tell the story better, like something built for council or the public or needs to be not just what you're putting on your house, or it seems to me that we haven't cracked how we discuss, like the toilet doors that Councillor Ferry was talking about. We sometimes put massive steel doors on because they don't burn and they're much harder to vandalise. But if we put a wooden door on, we'd be replacing it every 2 years. How can we use this to start finding out how we can make things cheaper, but also maybe show the public why it needed to be so expensive, or whatever that might be?
Yeah, another good question. I'll have a go, and maybe Ross will have a go again. I guess in one way what this shows is that all the different components of what we spend our money on do have value. To get a high score in any of these, you have to be, health and safety, it's about reducing death, and critical renewals, it's about failure within a year. So the things that are scoring very high here are those urgent, very important investments. So, there's a way of packaging up the story around that. It doesn't quite get to, I think, the nub of your question, which is around those individual investments and the reason why some of them are more expensive than others. We do have a criteria in here that's top right, efficient local government, and that speaks around whether the investment has had a cost-benefit analysis done for it, whether it's had a value for money review, section 17A. You can see there's a small proportion of our CapEx that have had that kind of scrutiny. The light blue on that top right bar is whether it's been out for a market procurement, so competitive investment, have we got the best price across the market? So there's elements of that. And I guess what we're saying here is out of the 40 billion CapEx, not enough. We haven't had enough of that scrutiny over value for money. And we know that there's direction from the Mayor into the next LTP, in this LTP and going forward, that we need more cost-benefit analysis in there. But yeah, there's probably a to say.
Yeah, they're very good questions, and I think that they can be brought together by thinking about traditional asset management and decision-making approaches, which tends to assume that you'll have an asset and it will last a certain number of years, and at the end of its life you will replace it with exactly the same asset in the same place for the same purpose. And you'll go through that cycle over and over. That's not fit for purpose anymore. And part of what we're trying to achieve with this reset that we're putting in place is looking at what the future might look like. Do we need those assets to deliver the services that we're trying to deliver? Do we need them in the same place? Do we need to build them out of something different? All those decisions need to be considered up front so that we can allow for the appropriate budget in 10 years, 30 years, 100 years to renew them or change them in the future. And that helps tell the story of the value, because if we're thinking about what it costs over the whole life cycle, then your wooden doors that fail every 2 years very quickly get seen to be more expensive than the expensive steel doors that last for 30 years.
Okay, so we've got 3 more questions, and just my intention is we're going to drive through and finish the agenda before we break. So short and succinct questions and short and succinct answers. Mike.
Thank you. Am I right in understanding that this is about asset management policy rather than management of assets as such? We're talking about a kind of a bureaucratic process rather than managing the assets. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, this is about ensuring that we are being efficient and effective in how we do the management of assets as a whole. So it's an internal facing policy, looking at how we deliver efficiently within the organisation.
Okay, so the process must relate to reality, of course. Okay. I see the Asset Management Centre of Excellence was announced in May, and I also note that there's a little bird up on the histogram saying that Auckland Council's annual investment in is larger than any other councils and some nationwide organisations. It's not a crow, but it seems to be crowing. But I would question that all of that $8 billion is actually investment. It is certainly expenditure, but there is sometimes a difference, quite often, between investment and spending. I'll make that point. My question is, coming back to reality, is the egregious failure, we're talking about a group exercise here, is the egregious failure of the Te Wero Bridge in the Wynyard Quarter, has any lessons been taken, learnings? Have any learnings been drawn from that episode, which is still ongoing in regard to asset management and what seems to be a failure in planned maintenance to bring the reality back to the theory or the process?
Kura, I think it's fair to say that we're learning every day, and that's one example of a useful learning opportunity. We know that mistakes are made, and we know that sometimes things are put in place for the short term that maybe should have been put in some for the long term. Good asset management planning is thinking about the long term, and so yes, lessons are being learned from those type of events and put into our plans for the future.
So you had some sort of inquiry into what actually went wrong and how to rectify it so it doesn't happen again. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that. I've not been directly involved in that particular case.
Chris.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Brian and Ross. When I look at the slide just before that one, if you could just bring it up, and sort of reflecting on the need to review the CCOs, but according to that, the CCOs, be they transport, water, Tātaki, Eke Panuka, are generally doing well in terms of the condition reports and understanding. And as highlighted by others, the worrying one is actually where we are responsible, and that's this council, a core council, and that's with community facilities. And if I look at community facilities, less than 10% are in the very good or good category. What really worries me is the grey bar, and others have pointed that out. I've had some experience recently with understanding, and Ross, you know this area, the coastal assets. And I have been stunned as to what we do not know about our coastal assets. Absolutely stunned. I've been assured that there have been asset management plans in place and audits, and discovered as I've dug into individual ones, they don't exist. So a failure happens, and it's quite considerable because the coastal environment is a tough environment with corrosion and fetch and etc. So I guess through this process, one is, I think I acknowledge the CCOs for doing well generally in asset management. I am very concerned about the governance responsibility here and the management responsibility over the community assets. And I would like us to, through this process, and I'm giving you feedback here as opposed to questions, I guess, that we really look at the big gap between our asset management or council and that of our CCOs, and identify what we don't know in the community facilities area. It is very worrying. There's probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in that grey bar that we don't know about, and it might just turn up red. And my observation from looking in this area very recently on some coastal assets is there's a lot of red. So I invite your comment about just the coastal structures.
Kira, this is an area close to my heart. I got involved in asset management when I first got involved in Auckland Council's coastal assets, and I had a similar, I would suggest, experience of being surprised at the level of information available. There's no doubt that we have a way to go. What we're putting in place here are the critical steps to ensure that those identified gaps are filled, and are filled to the very best of our ability. We want to move from where we are to aligning with international standards and being recognised as the best performing local authority. We think that we can do that, and we think that we should do that for our ratepayers, because if we're not giving them the best value. So I acknowledge what you say, and I support it.
Josephine?
Thank you. Thanks for this. I think quite a few of us came from local board, and how this was dealt with in local board was way more intensive. Like, we had more time, we had workshops, we looked at all our assets, we looked at what was deteriorating, and, you know, we could make our decisions that way. I know that today we're just passing a reporting framework, but I am in no way confident that I have any information to be able to make decisions on asset management just from a yearly reporting. So are we able to have workshops to go in depth into our assets like we do in local board land more than once a year to come up to making these decisions?
Correct. Well, first of all, I'd just like to highlight that what's been presented here is just a review of how much progress we've made. So this wouldn't be talking about decisions around the assets, but this is about reporting on whether our system as a whole, and the system is the whole of council, it's about the decision making, it's about more than just data and information, it's about how we actually operate as an entity, how we're progressing. So Gria's report that she will present annually is saying, are things heading in the right direction in terms of the system? As it comes to individual assets, I fully support having greater transparency, and part of what we're achieving trying to achieve with the Asset Management Centre of Excellence is to provide that transparency. Each part of council that owns those assets will come to you at different times to talk about their asset base and to explain the challenges they face and discuss the assets with you. And we expect that by providing this framework and this consistent approach, you'll be able to see that presented clearly in each case by different parts of council, but in the same way, so that you can get that transparency and make decisions when you're talking to them directly.
Okay, no more questions. Someone like to move? Thank you, Greg. Seconded by Richard. Any discussion? Those in favour say aye. And against, thanks. Thank you, Gria. Thank you, Ross. Right, the first up of the Auckland Transport reports, and it's the update, and ask the Acting Chief Executive, Murray Burt, to come forward. And just acknowledge just when the CEO's away, they make a policy of what they give people in the ELT the experience of acting in this role. So well done, Murray, and good to see you here in this role. And Stacey alongside to help out. So all yours.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Baker, and thanks for the introduction. I'll keep this relatively brief, just a summary of the report, and then we'll open up for questions, and I have Stacey here to support with public transport aspects. So hopefully I can make this thing work. So we'll be covering off today some capital program highlights, a review of the ferry program, flood recovery, which we've already touched on in a previous item, contactless payments and local board engagement. So yes, some recent highlights on the overall program. You'll see there the picture of new trains arriving. This is in the run-up to City Rail Link. Yeah, there's an even better version of this with Stacey holding the train. So the 23 trains are now rolling off the production line and coming into New Zealand, so that's good progress. I'll just highlight there on ongoing topics the issue of threats and aggression, which continues to be an issue out there, particularly on the public transport network and public-facing members of staff. So we remain committed to creating a safe environment and highlighting these risks that frontline workers have. In terms of the capital program, some pictures there from our ferry program, the flood recovery works there. You can see a retaining wall that's just been completed. Eastern Busways continues to progress well, and you can see there the piers for the Reeves Road flyover, and also good work happening with dynamic lanes and special vehicle lanes. Look ahead to what we're doing. As I said, trains continue to arrive, starting some works on the Half Moon Bay ferry charging facility, and then there's ongoing works at Point Chev and Westmere, and there'll be another picture we hope to share at some point of thousands of bicycles on Miola Road as that cycleway opens up. The ferry program is moving forward, and we were asked to bring an update to this committee. And so these slides cover off some details of the ferry program, but just to highlight that we do have 4 diesel vessels that have been refitted and now out in operation, and you can see one there in the picture at the top. There's 2 fully electric vessels under construction, and you can see that other picture there, and also 2 diesel-electric hybrid vessels under construction, and works are progressing on the charging infrastructure on landside. This slide covers off the charging infrastructure, and also the fact that we'll take a pause after the electric vessels are constructed and be thinking about what is the most appropriate cost-competitive way to continue on with the ferry program in the vessels and fleet. Flood recovery, we've touched on in previous discussions, but just to highlight, around 90% of the repairs are complete, but we still do have almost 200 sites that we're progressing on with, and these are some of the most major and complex sites, so this work still continues. And on the funding side, which has also been touched on, is we have a good amount of funding through NZTA emergency funding, and also Crown Infrastructure Partners and a portion of Auckland Council local share. And we're making good use of that money, but we are aware that some of the most complex sites are ahead of us. And so we're tracking well to finish within budget, but like I said, we're not at a point to declare any surplus at this point. Contactless payments. Good news here is that on the public transport network, we expect to have a contactless payment system operating by December this year. So we're tracking towards that quite well, and a number of slides here covering off the detail of that and the program. Final section here is just on local board relationships. We've got a good team working with the local boards on a program they call Kokiri agreements, and this is about having an agreement with the local boards on what will be delivered across the transport network, and then keeping local boards well informed and engaged in the process, and that's progressing well with most local boards signed up for that process, and we're rolling out in the coming months the Forward Works programming engagement with local boards. So I'll leave it there and open up for questions.
Thanks, Murray. Angela?
Thank you. Thanks, Murray and Stacey. Just the battery charging for the ferries. I'm wondering if that is the location you would have chosen if the cloud hadn't been there?
Through the chair, in response to that question, we have selected the most appropriate location in consultation with Eki Panuku and others. But just so people are aware, the way the charging is configured on Queen's Wharf, it is almost like a relocatable building, similar to classrooms you might have seen at your local school. So if at a point in time in the future there was a requirement to move the charging units, that's possible. But for this point in time, that's the most appropriate location.
Because timing is an issue, isn't it, to have them there in time for the electric ferries?
So yeah, in terms of timing, we're looking to progress as quickly as we can so that the charging is available when the electric ferries are completed.
Thank you.
The Mayor?
I think Councillor Dalton's onto something. That wharf isn't actually yours to decide to plonk those damn things on, and they're hideous. And I'm trying to get the harbour back for the people. 3 or 4 ugly boxes. I mean, surely they can be put somewhere up nearer the Quay Street or somewhere else, and run a wire to the ferries. The whole point is trying to make the harbour appealing, and so I don't think you've got the right just to plonk them down where you feel like it is. And I'd want to have a good debate about exactly how you deal with that. So why are they there? And do you think you've got permission to put them there yet? I mean, the whole thing's been fraught with disaster, that electrical ferry thing. So
Through the chair. So on the picture that you can see in front of you, the yellow highlight that says stage 1 would be the first elements to be installed. It wouldn't be the full 4 or 5 units that you can see there, just 2 of them. Also, just to reiterate the previous point, that these are relocatable, so they can be moved at some point in time in the future. In terms of the permissions to install them, currently AT's been consulting with Eki Panuku and others involved in the Queen's Wharf as to the best location, and this is where we've been directed. However, we will be going through a consent process, which I understand will be notified, so there will be opportunity for further engagement through that process, and ultimately we'll like to position them in the place that's most appropriate for the city.
thank you for that. I don't know if Eki Panuku also think that they've got the right just to plonk things wherever they are. Either. So that's 2 good reasons for CCO relocation. Thanks very much for that. If they're relocatable, we're going to relocate them somewhere else. Put them inside that hideous old shed 10.
Ken?
2 questions. First one, just following on from that, will the ferries that tie up while charging be in the new berth area or right beside those the battery stacks?
Through the chair, my understanding is that the electric ferries will continue to berth at the current berthing areas, and that the charging facilities will be available where they dock. So there's no intention to berth them on the other side where I understand cruise ships come in.
Thank you. I just asked that question because the further away from the battery the unit you're charging is, the longer it takes. The other question I had was just how are you going to make the work environment in that public-facing people, how are you going to make that work environment safer? You said that you're still having, disorderly behaviour challenging your staff in public places and that you're committed to making it safer. How?
Well, multiple things, I guess. Let's take a step back in terms of what we currently have. So we have obviously CCTV on board all our fleet, so whether they're bus, trains or ferries. And there has been some points in prior meetings about us not getting that to police quick enough. So we're making sure that that is done in a timely fashion and so that they have access to that straight away. Also making it more easily to report. And the other big thing, particularly from a workforce management perspective, is actually doing the bus driver screen rollout and trying to get that in place as soon as practical. So that is underway. There's 50 coming in the next few months and then 300 next year. In terms of that, the challenge has been with retrofitting is you've got lots of different fleet types, so it's about sort of going through and standardising design where it sits and then purchasing in bulk to be able to get that done. So they are some things, but it's also a continuation of the de-escalation training. We've got very good relationships with police and they've been very supportive in terms of responsive towards our requirements and supporting the bus drivers as well. So constantly looking about what we can do to improve and make sure we mitigate these instances, and the tracking of people and the follow-up has been really good. And you would have seen that there's new penalties coming out in terms of appropriate behaviours on public transport, particularly towards workers.
And have we priced a comparison between that and just simply putting security on some of the buses at intermittent times?
Yes, we have. I mean, it's in terms of that, it's about obviously, you've got your capital costs in terms of retrofitting your fleet, and so we've been through in terms of what it would cost in order to be able to resource having security guards on buses, and that is a huge cost that's ongoing, and in terms of that's really not a productive use of resource utilisation. So what we are doing is obviously we've got our transport officers and they are what I call specific in terms of they're deployed based on the intelligence we receive. And actually we've just developed a new fare evasion report, which is really cool, and potentially I can actually show you that next time if you like. But what it does is it heat maps in terms of where these things are occurring, which is really cool. So using that information we can be much more targeted, and it's a real-time dashboard to be able to support that. And so that's a new thing. Obviously, we've changed what we call the bus driver console to make it much easier for drivers to be able to report on, which is important because it used to be like a 7-step process. So we've shortened that to make it much quicker. And using that information also, our operators can go who's reporting proactively as well, and just follow up to make sure that drivers are reporting, which is important, right, to be able to understand where these things are happening. It's often a precursor to other things, but we are down the route of needing engineering controls, and that's important to be able to do as, what I call a proper solution. It doesn't take away from all the other things that we need to be doing, and that's including in terms of how we can support operators to deploy their own security within future contracting models.
Okay, I've got 7 people with questions. Let's see if we can do them without long stories leading up to them. Julie.
That was a bit pointed.
Oh, no.
It's fine. It's accurate. It's fine. Okay. So my first question was around the kōkiri work. Are these updates, these quarterly updates, going to go on their local board agendas? Will we get copied them as the ward councillors? That would be really useful, but both of those things.
I'll do my best to answer this question. My understanding is that kōkiri will be agreed with the local boards and would be resolved by the local board, so definitely it will go onto their agenda. And I presume that can be made available to General Council. Yes.
Cool. We get monthly updates from the community facilities, parks people, and they're really useful. So we just get copied the local board ones, or I do. Next question, around the Queen's Wharf charger issue. My understanding was that there's actually been quite a bit of work on this with the city centre residents group and some consultation and stuff. So did you want to just speak briefly to that in the context of the Mayor's concerns, that it's sort of being plonked down? There has actually been some background work done, I believe. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. There's been a wide level of consultation that's led us up to this point, involving your residents groups and as widely as possible engagement with those people in and around the area.
Thank you. Then my next 2 questions are about this driver safety issue and whether we think there's a racism element to some of this. It's an issue that's been raised by the Ethnic Communities Advisory Panel in particular, around that there may be some racism at play here, and whether that's something that we're looking to address, because that's something that engineering can't fix.
Absolutely, and yes, we are looking at options to support that and understand it is an issue, absolutely, and not just from a driver's perspective, also a customer perspective,
Yep.
customer to customer perspective. And I think we're actually going next Monday to next Tuesday, to the ethnic communities meeting,
Yep.
to be able to talk that through in terms of different initiatives. And there's also things like through police. Actually, I'm going to talk to the Chinese community tomorrow morning.
Yep.
To talk to them about their concerns as well, obviously of some incidents that happened out east.
Yep.
And so we're going to go talk to them tomorrow.
That's great to hear. And final question is the interaction there between driver safety and the fare evasion staff, and whether we think open loop is going to help with addressing some of that. And also sort of a related question around how do we count when the machines are out of order? Does that, like I've had that on buses this week a couple of times, is that something that is counted as a fare that's evaded, or is that just counted differently?
Yeah, good
Because some of
question.
those frustrations about the machines can sometimes be a point of conflict as well.
Absolutely. So they are counted differently in terms of that. It's automatically reported in terms of, so it's followed up for rectification, and we obviously have good information to support how long it takes to close those things out. But is there a good connection with open loop? Yes. I mean, I think what we can see is right now it's actually quite hard for people. If you don't have a hot card and you don't know how to use the system, or you've lost it or whatever it might be, you don't know your closest place to be able to get one, that's a barrier to entry in terms of using public transport. So in terms of open loop contactless payments, that takes a barrier away, yeah? And it also, you get into what's more legitimate fare evasion rather than just not prepared with your hot card. So very different, and it'll help us sort of target more measures with that.
Sorry, supplementary to that, what kind of training are the drivers receiving to deal with that inclusion of open loop? Because I imagine that, you know, obviously they're going to, on an ongoing basis, get tourists and stuff, but that's going to be relatively low for most commuter routes, for example. But what kind of support are the drivers getting in that shift? Because there will be a period of where a lot of people potentially are shifting.
Absolutely. So I know the program team has been working with their operators in terms of information to be able to support that and training materials, and that'll be reiterated for the first number of months in order to be able to support them with it, what they need to know, how people can pay, will it still make a beep, all those types of things that, are questions that you would ask as a driver, and to make sure that they know the appropriate information, and then where to, refer customers if they need support with that or more information themselves. So that's definitely being done, a key part of that change management.
Right, just thinking of that as another possible conflict point in terms of driver safety. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, thanks. Just in respect of the ferries, firstly, Stacey, really well done. I'm getting really good feedback from across the ward. We have 3 separate ferry services, and in particularly in that Gulf Harbour one, really good to see the people coming back. So that's really really uplifting. Just a couple of quick questions on the ferry. On the upgrade, I'm assuming one of the other benefits of the upgrade, aside from lowering emissions and in that space, is that we potentially have the ability to quicken the travel time. So better ferries, bigger ferries, particularly on the longer runs, are actually going to end up doing the route faster, aren't they? And as we go forward, that's obviously a real bonus for the network as a whole. So that's the first one. The second question just goes to the replacement program. So we have the different operators, but obviously fillers have the most craft. What's the prospects of having within say the next 5 or 6 years having a really good fleet that people are going to kind of enjoy a bit more comparability of customer experience?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. For us, I'm just going to make a plug, because with the accelerated ferry training program, we're actually implementing the last of the services, Half Moon Bay weekends, on November the 17th. And so that's 5 months ahead of schedule in terms of the program, which is really good. in terms of the conversations we were having probably at this point last year. So thank you for the feedback in terms of Gulf Harbour. We can see all those numbers going up really positively with ferries across the board, particularly with the Gulf Harbour one, given its low frequency prior. In terms of the fleet going forth, we've still got a piece of the market that we need to sort of address, and we call that the sort of Western package at the moment. And so we're just finalising plans for what that may be. But yes, the interoperability is really important. It's important in terms of obviously being way more efficient in terms of how you deploy your crew so that they can go on different boats and you don't need to train individually. So yes, that is being looked at in terms of that standardisation with how we go going forth, what the vessels may be and how they're sourced, whether that be the operator or us, is what we're having a conversation on now.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, but just reiterate that point. There's been some real good progress, and we should acknowledge that. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Honey?
Kia ora. Thanks for your update. The question I've got is more about, I don't identify anything there relating to Māori outcome. It's not one of your strategic issues or operational updates about engagement with Māori that's out there?
Thank you for your comment. You're right, it's not in this report. It is in our statement of intent measures that's reported on monthly. We'll take that on board and make sure that we put inclusions in.
Just a follow-up one. So it is a strategic issue that you need to report on?
It absolutely is.
Thank you.
Desley?
Thanks, Chair. I want to start by just congratulating you very much for the team of people you brought to public meeting on safety on our public transport. You did an outstanding job. And I really do wish you would sit down with some media and just talk through all the things you're doing, because I think, when it comes to public transport, whether it be racially driven or fare evasion driven or a combination of a whole myriad of things, people are getting wary, and I think to have that confidence that of all the issues that you're putting in place, all the mitigations you're putting in place will give the people of Auckland some confidence. So I just wanted to highlight that bit. But my question to you specifically today is because of what's happened this morning, and that is, first of all, to congratulate you on doing over 90% of the slip flood recovery repairs, rather, and you've got 196 sites to do. So my question to you are they in particular areas, or are they dotted around, and are there specific challenges with the remaining sites, or are they actually being done because they're less disruptive to traffic rather than because they're difficult?
Through the chair. So the remaining 196 sites, there's a range of reasons why they're in the last tranche. Some of them are the most major and complex. So we have in there the Millflat Road Bridge, which we just received consent for. There's the Manukau Heads major slip that you probably would have seen highlighted quite a lot on the news at the time of the floods. So they're major and complex sites. There's also the Scenic Drive cluster of slips, which is being worked on as we speak, and should hopefully be finished around December. The other element that we prioritised opening up access, so we focused on those ones first, so that everybody could get to their home in their area, hence the previous discussion around carry. And then we focused on those sites which were easier to repair, because we could do them quickly. And the final ones are just the most complex, or they're not as critical in terms of the network operation, and they're not cutting off access to people's houses.
And supplementary, if I may, do you think you'll have some money left over in that budget?
We're tracking very well in terms of progress against cost, but like I said, these remaining sites, there's still some of them under investigation and designs are not complete. So we're not 100% certain where we're going to land on cost. We're confident that we'll be within the available budget envelope, and that's what we're tracking for. There may be some surplus at the end if we do really well.
great. Thank you. You listening, Ken?
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you. I have to share the Mayor's concerns about what appears to be inappropriate industrialisation of Outer Queen's Wharf. Queen's Wharf was purchased by the Auckland Regional Council and the New Zealand Government back in 2009, essentially for a cruise ship terminal, but also with much needed, much desired public open space on the waterfront. And that public open space also had the attributes of opening the CBD, the central city up to the harbour, and so there was a landscape and seascape aspect, an aesthetic aspect to it as well. How it's worked out, Queen's Wharf has been utilised somewhat pragmatically. There's a taxi rank on the inner wharf now because those taxis have been shunted by AT off the city streets and onto the wharf, which I don't think any of us envisaged would happen. Nonetheless, it kind of works, so fair enough. The outer wharf is utilised by the public, and that's where people go fishing, sit in the sun, or just commune with the sea. And I'm very concerned about these multi-storey electric charger facilities, which are located so far away from where the ferries berth, when there are places on that wharf to do that, to enable that facility, if you're using that sort of electric technology. So that's a concern. My question is, in terms of AT's evident ambition to take over the whole or most of the ferry fleet to drive efficiencies, I won't comment on that. Do I take it that the ratepayers will be paying for the build of these new ferries and the obviously very expensive ancillary work, but those ferries will be managed by Fullers? Is that how it works?
I'll answer half the question and then Stacey can talk about the operational aspects. So yeah, we note your points there about the location of the charging on Queen's Wharf. In terms of the ferries themselves and the model, the cost model is that capital expenditure would buy the ferries and they would be owned by Auckland Transport, similar to the way that we run the rail fleet, and an operator would then operate them. In terms of the funding, they're being funded through multiple sources. So there's a share from central government through ECA. There's also co-share through NZTA, so central government, 2 different funding streams, and then a local share component. The cost of capital funding is generally at a lower price than OPEX, and if we continue to operate the ferries through a third-party supplier, we pay for the cost of the ferry, but it's as an operating cost, not capital. So that's how the financial modelling was structured. But Stacey can talk perhaps about the operating model going forward.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, the short answer is yes, they will be operating and managing the fleet.
By Fullers?
Yes.
So Fullers will be sending the profits as per normal back to Scotland, and the public, ratepayers and taxpayers, will be fronting up essentially to enable that. That is a real concern. What sort of competitive price process did AT engage in before giving this extremely expensive contract to Fullers?
Thank you, Councillor. At the time, it was a negotiated deal with Fullers. I do not know the specifics in terms of at the time, but it's important to note this was also part of bringing in Devonport at the time. And so Devonport had obviously been a commercial exempt service, and so a part of that agreement was also bringing Devonport into the public transport realm.
I do recall I was given a personal briefing about this project. I don't know, maybe sometime last year, last April, and I expressed my reservations, quite strong reservations at the time. I had hoped that it would go away. Obviously, it hasn't. So, can I ask? I'm at least relieved to hear Mr. Burt say that there will be a public notification of this, because there are a lot of people already quite ticked off about what you intend to do to their Queen's Wharf. A civic leader at the time proclaimed that Queen's Wharf was the People's Wharf, but it seems to be turning into a AT wharf, unfortunately. So when is the public notification process likely to kick off?
Thanks for the question. So, as it says on the slide here, we're planning to go for consent later this year. So I think it's imminent within the next 6 weeks that we'll be moving forward with the consenting process, and it's likely to be publicly notified.
Thank you.
Richard. Just on the ferries, thanks, Chair. So we own 4 of the previous fullers owned, and now there's going to be 4 low emissions and electric too. I thought part of the point was because in the past we've tried to tender contracts and no other company has boats. So part of the reason is now we're in charge of the maintenance and renewal, and we also have the ability to change the tender if we ever needed to. I mean, the company, when we've had issues pop up. And that's what we're doing with some of the other things at the moment, aren't we? The other services?
Absolutely. So thank you, Councillor. I mean, that was the core reason in terms of looking at our own fleet, was actually to bring in competition and to actually take away those barriers to entry to the market in order to be able to create competition. And that's a fundamental point in terms of that. It was extremely challenging for any new operator to enter in the market and actually have the fleet availability on day one to be able to do the service. This gives us more flexibility with our contracting model, and therefore in bringing in more competition to the market going forth.
Thank you. 2 other questions. One on the pay wave. So when we bought hop cards in, obviously they were at a lower price to encourage people not to sit there with the change and delay the buses. I realise when you're looking at the $50 or student subsidies or whatever, they'll still need to use hop card. But are we going to have the pay wave cost at the AT hop cost? Because I don't understand why you'd have that discrepancy anymore. Because it's $6 right now if I tag someone else on, so essentially the cash fare, and it's $4.45 on my hop card, which I'm assuming or hoping that if you're using a pay wave, so you're not slowing down the fleet, it'll be $4.45 as well.
Confirming it is exactly the same cost as the standard hop fare, standard adult hop fare.
Yeah, okay, that's great news. No more cash fares. That's really, really good news. The other question is just, I listened very carefully to the Minister of Transport's stand up on safety and reversing our speeds. And of course, we are going to have monumental cuts to our safety programs, as in the paper yesterday, several councillors commented, and obviously safety projects. But he did say in an answer to a question that if we could prove there were safety issues, we don't have to reverse those speeds. The memo we've received today says we do have to reverse all the speeds. So I guess my question is, A, is it correct what the Minister said that now if we prove there's a safety risk, we don't have to switch them? So that'll be my first question, then just a follow-up.
Thank you, Councillor. I think there are parameters within the rule that enable decisions, but the team is still very much working through what that new rule means and what that means in terms of what we have currently and also any proposed plans for going forth. But I do understand there are measures within that rule that suit certain circumstances. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess my question to you, and I don't want to do an amendment or anything, but I think we shouldn't reverse any speeds if we believe we have evidence of harm, because that is on us and on the AT board. Those deaths and serious injuries that will come, there will be more people dead and hurt if we reverse them all based on our evidence. I don't think we should reverse those. How do we-
So we'll stick with what the update and what the report is, Richard, and we'll get the opportunity to talk about speed rules when that comes. I don't think it's fair to lump that onto the staff today when it's not part of this update. So let's just keep focused on what we're talking about here, eh? Shane.
Thanks, Chair. Real quick one. Last month I asked for an update on the national ticketing solution, particularly the financial implications and actually the implications on our contactless payment program. So just really keen to figure out where that's at. And we can do this out of the meeting, it's cool, but yeah, just whenever you can.
Thank you, Councillor. Let's take that one and we'll meet with you separately in terms of that. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Karen?
Kia ora. Just first of all, want to acknowledge a quick response that Stacey led in terms of setting up the Teams meeting with Rachel Carr and co-chairs Chris and Irene with regard to the bus drivers being attacked. So kia ora for that, and agree with the Deputy Mayor's comments about trying to focus on some good work comms out to reassure our community that AT is actually taking action on that. I just want to ask, do you think there'd ever be an option to look at having an ethnic communities Facebook page with AT? Do you think that's something that's been considered?
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know if it has been something that's been considered. I'll take that away and talk to the appropriate teams.
Okay, and secondly, just around procurement, in terms of the contracting with storm recovery, I know that I've been bringing this up in other parts of the council, but has it ever been considered that we could scale down the criteria to allow for smaller companies to have an opportunity to go for bids with regards to Auckland transport work in the future?
Thanks for the question. Currently, we have a range of procurement options that Auckland Transport can proceed with, and definitely we look to engage with smaller suppliers where possible, where they have the capacity and on a competitive process. So yes, there are options to draw in smaller suppliers either directly or as subcontractors.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no further questions. Someone like to move? We receive the report. Thanks, Desley. Seconder. Thank you, Julie. Those in favour say aye. And against? Carried. Is there any requirement for a debate? Perfect. Thanks, team. We will move on to the next item, the improving network productivity. And